So joining me for the third time on the Neil Wilkins podcast, delighted to welcome back one of my favourite guests, actually, Emma Burlow. Now, Emma is an independent climate and sustainability advisor, as well as a fellow carbon literacy trainer. But more interesting than that, I guess, for most of us, and certainly for me, is she's also the host of a brand new, well, semi-brand new podcast called Straight Talking Sustainability. And we're going to hear about that. And that is going to be the theme, because I think we're all trying to figure out what is straight talking sustainability. So no one better qualified to share the ideas, the tips, the tricks, and also kind of what's happening in sustainability right now. Emma, welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Neil. It's great to be back.
Podcast, straight talking sustainability. Isn't that what the world needs?
Well, I think so. And I came to the name, as I'm sure everyone who does a podcast spends weeks and weeks writing lists of names. It's like choosing a name for a child or something, you know. And eventually I was just tearing my hair out with it, because it was actually stopping me launching the podcast because I couldn't decide what to call it. And someone just said to me, well, you're really straight talking, just call it that. I was like, oh, okay. So all my hours of list writing and, you know, epiphany moments. But yeah, it seems to have stuck quite well, and people get it. And I also have always felt quite strongly about demystifying things. And dare I say it, cutting through the crap, I guess, Neil, which is what people tell me they're hearing a lot of, which we really don't need. You know, it's confusing enough as it is without people making it more complicated.
So, well, yeah. It is. And I guess as fellow carbon literacy trainer, tutor extraordinaire. I mean, you're the extraordinaire, not me. But
oh, no.
It kind of feels that I think there's this common theme, I think, for all of us who have been kind of in or around this topic for many, many years, that there is this kind of, I think, real need not only to kind of cut through it, just to kind of understand ourselves what to do and how to do it, as much as then actually communicating it on to our customers. Because if we don't get it as individuals, we're not going to be able to communicate onwards, are we?
No, not at all. And when I set up the business Lighthouse, I very much had this vision, if you like, of giving people direction, or giving people, helping people navigate. And so the podcast fits quite well with that, although it's less advisory and more kind of chatty, I guess, just sort of covering, you know, different topics, things that have come up, questions that I get asked. But I do feel like we are tying ourselves in knots with this problem, and we don't really have time to unravel that. And I think unintentionally people do use it as an excuse. Businesses will say to me, oh, it's so confusing, we just can't get started, you know. So I'm kind of done with that now, and I'm like, right, okay, if I can just make it simple, would you do these 3 things, you know? Now, I'm aware that there's a danger of oversimplifying things, Neil, so you'll know from carbon literacy training, you can only boil it down to so much, and people have to understand the scientific kind of background. But I'm a great believer in it's better to do something than nothing, and sort of pontificate about, am I doing the right thing? Is it perfect? Am I, you know, should I do this? Should I do that? Just get on and do it. And the rest will come. So a lot of the impact I see is a result of momentum. Well, you don't get momentum if you're stuck arguing and debating about what the best thing to do is. So yeah, the podcast was born, and it was really born, and I need to thank you and other podcasters from other people being brave enough to do it before me. So on the shoulders of giants and all that. Plus I turned 50 and it just seemed like a mad thing to do.
Creating that legacy. I tried. Emma will be able to say, I tried. Some people listened, but I tried, which I guess is all we can really hope for, isn't it, really? I mean,
what's the phrase? You've got to put it out there and just
you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
No.
I mean, it just feels that is it, isn't it? We're showcasing, we're talking, we're exploring. And if we can just get 1 or 2 people to just hook in and think, hold on a minute, there's something in this, then probably our job is done. Is that how you feel?
I don't think our job's ever going to be done, but I do feel that people, or at least they've told me, that they find it supportive to have that voice. Someone who's maybe, I'm an independent, I'm self-employed, I can say things that other people in corporate jobs can't say. And so for me, it's about maybe moving the dialogue forward. So as you know, trying to market to people, you've only got a few formats really to reach people. And I came to the conclusion that I wasn't, at the moment at least, organised enough to write a book. I may never write a book. I did co-author a book many years ago, but I'd love to. But someone said to me, well, then why don't you just put all the episodes down as if you were writing a book? But I'm a lot better at speaking than I am writing. So it just came from that, really, Neil. Sort of like, well, it's sort of, if I was going to write a book, this is what I would write about anyway. So maybe that'll come. Maybe that'll be my next madcap idea. But yeah, you've got to give people support. You've got to give, I think, confidence comes from being surrounded by other people who feel the same as you. So if it inspires somebody to do something, then you're right. It's moved a rock, and that's where the momentum starts.
I just want to go back to the point that you just made just a moment ago. This whole idea of you're independent, you can make the choices. So somebody kind of in a role in an organisation who's kind of, I guess, maybe been there for a while, and they know the ropes, they know all the systems and everything, they know how it works. There possibly is, though, a bit of a resistance, a bit of a fear to kind of rock the boat, because normally we would be kind of getting things signed off, or we would be waiting things until things are absolutely watertight before kind of taking them public. I think we're kind of the feeling, and I think as like-minded feeling here, that it's okay just to begin with this stuff, because otherwise it's going to be too late anyway, and then you won't even have a business or a world to kind of be working within. So we're just making a start is absolutely key. Do you see that as a pattern, this kind of fear of imperfection? Because you and I, I'm sure, are talking to a lot of people about just make a start, and it's okay to just share that journey. You don't have to kind of have achieved something or got there. But it's a problem to overcome, isn't it, for people who are not trained that way?
Yeah, it's a real problem to overcome. And when you consider the different personalities in a business and the different cultures, you can go into one business and they will call that whole conversation innovation, Neil, and they'll go, we're really innovative and we're always trying new things. You can go into another business, potentially even the same sector, and they'll say, we can't do that. So it can come down to individual cultures, and it can come down to individuals' personalities. And I do talk a little bit about this when I'm carbon literacy training around, your influence is your superpower. So that was one of the first episodes I did, because I firmly believe that. But you've got to kind of know what you're up against. And I think that's where being within the business is actually the best place to be, because you know who your allies are, you know where your kind of threshold for upsetting people is, or being ignored, or whatever it might be. So you have to know, I think, your audience very well, and that's harder from an external point of view. But I can open the door and rattle the cage a little bit, and ask people to at least be curious, and that's quite difficult, I think, from inside sometimes, because, like you say, you're on rails, you've got plans, you've got stuff that has to be done. Being curious is just wasting time. But I do talk to people about, more innovative thinking, being allowed to fail. So almost setting it up that you don't have all the answers, because we don't. It's absolute nonsense to say we have all the answers, even to 2030, never mind 2050. And I sort of struggle with that a bit, because if you go into a business and say, oh, what's your business plan to 2030? It won't be 100% complete. They won't know, because how can you? So for some reason, and I think it's probably because sustainability was initially born out of compliance, at least in the business sector, a lot of people seem to think there should be a watertight plan. And it's uncomfortable to sometimes accept that that's an impossible thing. once you do accept that, the doors start flying open and loads of opportunities come your way. But it's the usual thing. If you're in a business where that's not the done thing, compliance is the done thing, that's going to be difficult. So yeah, hopefully we can help people have a little bit more confidence. And a lot of the time it's just about asking the right questions. Rather than being seen as having all the answers.
Yeah, so it is a tricky one though, isn't it? Because, and I get the sensitivity within some organizations where, they're very much, let's just call it sales driven. So it is all about the tactical numbers. I've got to do this month's data, this month's numbers. I've got to kind of get sales in the door. And that is the focus.
Yeah.
And then you want to talk to me about sustainability? Well, I haven't got time for that unless there's a commercial reason for it. If I can maybe see that as a commercial benefit, so it can be something that we're more competitive than the business down the road, so kind of come to us and almost kind of couch it in those terms that there's a commercial value to it. A lot of people will say, again, like you said before, I haven't really got time for that because we've got to do our numbers, we've got to do the sales. It's a hard kind of balancing act, isn't it, really, from a commercial angle, if you can't see that natural benefit there.
Yeah, it's, I call it looking at a different window. So if you're looking at one window, it is different. It is difficult without intentionally going, well, actually, I sort of half get it. I'm going to look out the other window and see what it's like. If you've got 3-month cycles and 1 year, business plans, it is really, really tough. But I believe, because of all the training that I've done, that it lies just below the surface. And I feel like when I train people, I don't know how you feel, Neil, but it's almost like you've given them permission, and they were kind of thinking that anyway. So we have values. We're just humans who happen to go to work. And once you tap into those values, and this doesn't sound very commercial yet, but once you tap into those values, people get it. They kind of go, oh, right. So there is loads we could do. I thought it was all going to be really hard. Right. Okay. Well, why aren't we doing it? And it's kind of, almost like a light switch, because people don't inherently want to be harmful or impact, and have impacts on the planet. So I find carbon literacy training very powerful in that respect, because you get people to sit still long enough to think about it. And even if they are sales driven, and I train lots of commercial teams, but pitching it in words like risk, cost, frequency and intensity. Are you costing that in? Even the kind of most diehard commercial person kind of goes, ooh, I don't think we're accounting for that. And that's interesting. So for me, the bit I like is just almost looking into people's minds and saying, well, what is it for you? Is it your values? Is it your kind of assessment of risk? Is it your compliance, nature? And actually, I'm almost yet to find somewhere or something that doesn't turn that light on, because there's so many facets to sustainability, aren't there? There's cost, there's, giving a monkeys about the future. There's, as you said, competitive benefit. There's risk. There's greenwashing. I mean, there's just hundreds of things.
It's kind of redefining. Well, I certainly see it as redefining, a huge part of, well, let's call it sales and marketing, but actually how you go to market. I mean, it's almost like we're talking a different language, hopefully not just you and I, but, as an industry, we're kind of talking now a different language. Well, there's, as you say, permission to talk a different language.
Yeah.
We're not talking about encouraging consumption.
There's a lot behind
we're talking
that.
about value here, aren't we?
Yeah, but there's a lot of resistance, Neil, and it's because of, I grew up in the era of tree huggers, greenies, and there's a lot of latent resistance to that. And so it's almost like you said about marketing. The market has changed. And the bit I sometimes struggle with is like when you do, I don't know, you tell me, when you do market assessments, you look at kind of the trends, the political influences, like what's going on, the classic kind of pestle thing. It's like, well, why wouldn't you look at this? And it's staring you in the face. And I think it's that term blindingly obvious. is, I think, really interesting, because it's really, really, really obvious, but people are blinded by it. And so they kind of just go, oh, nothing to see here. Don't Look Up is a great example of that, the movie. So I think it's fascinating about just peeling back those layers. And so I don't feel the need to convince people at all anymore. It's just allowing them to say out loud, this is kind of concerning, isn't it? Yeah. What we're going to do about it.
Simple. Yeah, that's the straight talking bit, isn't it?
Yeah,
That
I think so.
it is about, kind of saying it in very simple language, because it is concerning. You look at wildfires, you look at the weather, you look at, all of those kind of immediate local impacts, and suddenly it's like, oh my goodness, that it's not in somebody else's backyard. Yeah. It's actually here for all of us right here, right now. So it is that immediacy, isn't it? I was interested in your kind of words there in terms of that whole kind of short term and kind of maybe longer term view. Do you see a difference between organizations who have got a more strategic kind of longer term purpose and those who are very much about the immediate tactical? Is it kind of easier to do one or other? Does it kind of sit more comfortably with one approach?
Yeah, and it's not always about the time frame either. It's about the intention and the purpose of the business for me. So I don't work with that many what I would call purpose-driven companies. So, actual ethical businesses. But I've got a client, Revolution Zero, who set up from square one, to be a circular business. In fact, I'm a founding director, so I'm on their board. So, and you see a complete difference there. So where the business was set up with the intention of, reducing the impact of the dominant business model, you're pushing an open door there, and all you have to do, the hard bit there is just working out what you can afford and what's reasonable and at what pace. But it's really hard for businesses who were set up to make money, Neil. That's what they were set up for. Even though most people you ask will say they go to work for other reasons as well as to make money, to provide a good product or to provide a high quality service or to solve a problem. Right? To help people, I don't know, with their insurance claims or whatever it is they do, to help people access healthcare, whatever it is. But they seem to lose that in the pursuit of the profit. So that there is a difference. And the biggest difference you see, obviously, is with companies who've gone through B Corp, who understand that there's a difference and have intentionally moved their governance to, so the business exists for the purposes of making profit for the shareholders, but also for the purposes of reducing harm to society or reducing their impact on the environment. So you suddenly go from a one-legged stool to a three-legged stool, which I don't particularly think is a massive leap and a jump, but, for some companies, that's just not in their DNA. So they're the companies that are the hardest to work for, because for them, it's always going to be window dressing, which we know is, the danger of that is greenwash. So there's some tough cookies in that respect. But what I find with those, and I've had a few, and I enjoy working them just as much because I find it a real challenge, their customers will start asking for it. So I've never been in a business where there isn't a commercial imperative to do it, honestly. I haven't.
That's hope then, isn't it? There's a real kind of, that makes me feel lifted. That's almost like an energizer. You just think, oh, there is hope, when customers
I can't see how there is,
it.
because if you rely on resources to be on the planet, you rely on people who surveys suggest are concerned about this stuff. It's not a good look, even from a staff point of view, if you are blatantly not doing anything, or if you're, hauled over the coals for greenwash or whatever, your staff are not going to be very happy. Your customers, I've had a client in the last couple of weeks who a customer has at last, after 2 years, said that they're going to potentially end the contract if the actions aren't taken, right, around carbon reporting. So these things are starting to bite. And whilst you could say, oh, but they're not doing it for the right reasons, I'm like, you know what, I'll take it. Lots of us don't do things for the right reasons, but as long as we do them, Yeah, so I stand by that. I've never met a business where there isn't a commercial imperative. It's harder than there's, a tiny little micro business, a tradesperson or something. That's harder because they haven't got that reach, they haven't got that kind of consumer edge. But if you look at it, food that's going through the mill, anything to do with energy consumption, anything to do with travel, tourism. I mean, you name it, hospitality. Every one of them's got a sustainability lens to it.
Do you not think, in terms of the kind of the micro business or the sole trader, that actually the other sort of flip side of the coin is actually they're the ones who can make the difference, because they've still got customers, they're still kind of out and about, and it's that local element of it, isn't it? That, okay, my community might be a lot smaller than a big corporate or a big brand, but actually in my sphere of influence, little is good, because I've actually got the voice of the customer coming through, because I meet the customer, because I am a micro business. I would have thought actually there's an opportunity for even the smallest player, I mean, little old me, to be able to make an impact.
Don't get me wrong.
At a small level.
There is an opportunity, but I think maybe they're just not feeling the pressure quite as much. But if they set up with that in mind, again, there's a lady in the village who's a painter decorator. She advertises herself on using low toxicity paints and all this sort of stuff. It's brilliant. So she will attract a certain type of customer. But yeah, I think where you haven't got the pull or the push from a bigger supply chain, that's harder. Your customers aren't maybe asking you for it. So let's say you're a window cleaner or something, right? If your customers aren't saying, I mean, how many people are going to say, actually, I want an ethical window cleaner? But you might think, well, actually, I can save a bit of money, I can do this, I can do that. So it's starting to astound me that people that almost that you think are the least likely to do something are turning around going, oh, I bought a new EV. And you're like, what? Yeah, because it cost me 8p to charge it instead of 40 quid or something to put it up. So I have lots of hope, because I keep bumping into people, as I say, overhearing conversations on the train. I was running behind a couple of people at Parkrun the other week, a couple of blokes that I roughly know, just vaguely know from Parkrun. They talked the whole way round about solar panels. I was just like loving it. I was just loving it. I was just like, and they were like, yeah, and I did this, and then I did this, and then I had to find out this, and like they were new to it, right? They were completely new to it. So that normalizing thing, which is another reason I wanted to do the podcast, it's like, let's take this down a level from, the kind of high end. This is really complicated. Oh, you wouldn't understand it. You better get a consultant to actually. You would understand it. You can do stuff. You might need a nudge, but
and a little bit of a supporting hand, isn't it?
Hand holding.
Because if somebody kind of thinks, okay, I've got the drive, I'm feeling it, I've read and heard enough now. I listened to your podcast, Emma, and I'm feeling it. I'm feeling inspired, but I don't really know what to do. Then there is a lot of support out there, isn't there? There's obviously there is carbon literacy training, but you can self-serve though, can't you? I mean, you can kind of do it alone just by listening and watching.
I think so, because it's a definite topic of where you learn as you go. People worry, I haven't got a degree in it, I haven't done this. Like, well, you learn how to do all sorts of things as you go, don't you? You learn how to cook, or you learn how to, you might be training for something. You learn as you go. So I want it to be more like that, and less kind of, we're like, the things you hear, we're too small to make a difference. It's rubbish. Being more sustainable is all very well, but it's going to cost us loads of money. Well, the latest episode I just recorded today is all about hacks, just things that we can do in our day-to-day lives. There's a lot of excuses, So, I don't know, in my carbon literacy training, I do quite a lot of this, trying to sort of debunk the, not only the misinformation, which is unhelpful, but also the excuses we sort of just make ourselves. It's going to be expensive. Well, then do the things that don't cost anything. like turning down your thermostat or composting your food waste or, whatever.
Yeah, it's just really, really interesting to think just how simple it can be. Do you see a kind of a move in certain sectors? Obviously, you cross over in, Lighthouse Sustainability, and now obviously within the podcast, you cross over loads of different sectors and markets. So you've got this kind of broad view, kind of this world of sustainability. Do you see any kind of positive signs in terms of government or regulations kind of coming in terms of the kind of the carrot and the stick? Because there will be, for some industries, rules and regulations, again, going back to the compliance thing, where if you want to trade, you have to behave like this. So the kind of almost like the big stick is there. It's like you can't do it without doing it.
It's a massive
do you see this emerging now?
Yeah, there's some massive sticks coming. And for big companies, we're talking about millions of pounds in taxes and potential fines. And absolutely that. I was with a company in Amsterdam, and those words were said. There may come a point where we can't trade in this market. Not about the UK. They're actually talking about some markets in Asia where single-use plastic bans have come in, and it affects their product. So, and there were lots of jaw drops all around the room, like this was such new, like a surprise. And we had a panel. And somebody from it was mainly marketing people, global marketing team, said, why are we only just finding out about this? And sort of I looked at the packaging compliance person, he looked at me, and we tried not to smirk, And I haven't been working with the company that long, so it wasn't like, oh, well, I've told you so. I just said, look, my first job out of uni in 1995, I hate to think how, it's 30 odd years ago, was in packaging compliance. The packaging waste regs came out in the mid-90s. Like, we've been paying packaging tax ever since. And I think what's happened is no one's joined the dots up with people like marketing, So the packaging compliance guys are all over it. And he was kind of like rolling his eyes, like, I've been saying this for years. So I think some of the birds are coming home to roost. Is that what they're saying?
I think it is. Yeah.
So there's some big stuff. The EV mandate is another one. There's the ZEV mandate. People don't understand that these things are hard baked. The government strategy to decarbonise by 2035, food waste extension for all homes by 2027. People seem to still think, and I completely understand why, because it's not exactly tabloid news or day-to-day news. People seem to think this is just optional, that we might or we might not. But there's loads of stuff hardwired, which is great. Always more we could do, but
That's an interesting one, though, isn't it, really, when you say it's not really kind of media, well, I'm paraphrasing it, but it's not really media friendly. I mean, it so should be. I mean, because it is, it's this potential chaos and carnage coming, and yet it doesn't. Yeah, and yet, sort of Strictly Come Dancing or whatever can, and other things can take, those tabloid inches or the, BBC homepage or whatever. It's quite bizarre. As a social experiment, this is quite bizarre, isn't it? Just how bad does it have to get before it becomes a thing? I know it's a thing for a lot of us, but mainstream thing. I mean, how far do you think it has to go?
Oh, unfortunately, it has to get a lot worse before it gets better. I mean, you see that our sort of denial of things, and I don't mean climate denial so much, but because that's actually very, very tiny. It's sort of diminishing number of people that will even, suggest that they don't believe in climate change. But now the big debate is about what we should do about it, or whether we should do anything about it. And so there's so much. I think we've hung ourselves around this narrative that. And I think it all boils down to the conflict of sustainability versus consumption. So, the very kind of premise of being more sustainable means that you should consume less stuff. Now, our media is really just a mouthpiece for all other trends going on in society, aren't they? And they have vested interests, and we know that, sort of who they're owned by, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you were to stand up and say, let's slow down consumption, which is effectively what you're saying with sustainability. Not, not always, but effectively, it's not a popular message. So it's interesting. What I find interesting, Neil, is how quickly that's changed, because this has really all happened since the end of World War II. Like almost all of it.
Absolutely.
Right? The carbon emissions, the waste crisis, obviously some of the social issues, have actually improved around the world. But the environmental issues, really, the uptick has been in the last 30 to 50 years. So media's got a lot to say, a big part to play in that, I think. It's fascinating when you think about it.
It is. I mean, for you, is this where circularity comes in? A lot of people listening to this will know that we've had, a number of episodes where I kind of drip in this concept of circularity. For a marketer, kind of, it could be a subscription style model where you don't encourage consumption, but you just give value on return of some kind of, payment, if you like, in a subscription style, which is the easiest way I find to describe it. Are you an advocate of circularity? Because it seems to make sense, because it doesn't encourage, consumption, but it just allows trade to flow, doesn't it?
It makes perfect sense. I mean, it's difficult when something makes so much sense to you that you can't work out. You have to try and see things from the other side. And I understand why consumables are as popular as they are, single use is as popular as it is, but it really makes no sense. Because those products or those business models, those linear business models, were designed at a time and still are. They were designed, but now they just ignore the external costs. So when you needed to reboot the economy after the Second World War, it made sense to make loads of stuff, right? To fill factories up, to spend money, to, reboot. That made sense. It doesn't make sense now. The only reason it makes sense is because there's a quick buck to be made. So we're squeezing the lemon, really. And we're down to the pips, And so that's where you see companies going to the wall, because they've squeezed themselves so hard. The margins are so small. Doesn't take much of a shock, for them to go under. So it's a really fragile model. And so when I do work with those companies where they are in that tough edge, it's usually fast moving consumer goods or electronics or something like that. One of the questions I ask them is it's a race to the bottom. I mean, is that really the market you want to be in? Like, who's going to be the next to go? But if that's your world, that's the world that you've worked in, it's very difficult to kind of go, I'll go and do something different, So we've got a lot of legacy in terms of the way we've been told to do business. But circularity, to your question, makes absolute sense. It's my kind of the reason I'm here, really. It makes perfect sense to me. And what makes sense to me is there's so much more revenue to be made out of circular business models than there is a linear, where you get to sell it once. Like this laptop could be sold once, or it could be sold 3 times. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out which is more profitable. So I don't know. The resistance is, and people badge this as people don't like change, which I also think is nonsense. People change things all the time. But people are not quite hardwired, but they're on rails, And you go to work, you can't pick up that rail and turn it round. So it takes quite a bit for someone to say, hang on a minute, should we rethink this? And meanwhile, this juggernaut is coming by you high speed. So yeah, it takes a bit of bravery, I think, but it can be done. It needs to be done.
Well, it does, doesn't it? And I think kind of pointing forward before this juggernaut kind of catches us is kind of, well, what's your view for 2025 then? I mean, obviously we're at quite a profound moment. We've just had the latest COP, and there is talk. It feels like a groundswell in lots of different sectors. What are you seeing as maybe the potential trends? I mean, this is kind of Emma's crystal ball time, predicting for next year.
I don't think I've even had this thought yet.
Happen?
Well, COP was really interesting. I didn't expect anything else from COP, and I'm a sort of believer in that things happen for a reason, and things will happen at a pace, and some things can't be forced. And trying to get 196 countries together to agree on something that they don't agree on. I mean, some of those countries are at war with each other. Like, that whole premise of that they're all going to agree on something just seems so bizarre to me that I really admire that process. So the fact that not as much happened as we expected doesn't surprise me at all, right? The fact that the oil lobby are there doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, you haven't got to look far to see that that's how the economies around the world are run. So we came out then, obviously we had Trump getting back in, which was more of a shock to me than COP, if I'm honest. Was it the other way around? I can't remember which way. The other way around, wasn't it? Trump first. But even that, I've sort of turned around and gone, that just feels like a blip to me. It's quite an important blip, but it feels like just an irritating blip, because the trend, the industrial revolution is happening, and you can't stop those things. It'd be a bit like someone saying, oh, we're going to push against digital, we're going to stay analog. Well, they might do it for a few years, and some countries did, but they're all digital now, right? And so it's the same with low carbon. It doesn't make sense to stay in fossils when everybody else is moving, economically. So 2025 is maybe too short a window, but I do think, or I do see this kind of doubling happening. We're seeing it with EVs, we're seeing it with solar, we're seeing it with renewables, and that's why people get frustrated. But I also think, well, actually, there's quite a lot of signals. There are a lot of signals. And when you are running behind someone who talks for half an hour about their solar panels, something's changed in your neighbourhood. Right?
It's a sure sign, isn't it? Yeah, it's kind of part of that common narrative, and suddenly it's just normal. It's normalising, like you say.
Yeah, I was stood on the platform waiting for a train the other day, and the guy next to me was talking to his colleague about net zero. Right? I have no idea who they work for, but anyway. So for me, those little social signals are really important. More important than, I guess, the annoyance of, oh, look, that's overpackaged, or, I don't know, Elon Musk and all his crazy, missives. So yeah, the trend, I think, has started, and there'll be forwards and backwards. We'll gain and then we'll lose. But I think we'll see some pretty big advances in 2025, because things start to leap once you get, prices are dropping and et cetera, et cetera. So it'll be really interesting to see, and without being too political, and I'm not a political person, so I don't, I'm not probably the best person to comment on it. We're really interested in seeing how China respond to Trump, because I think he's ironically opened the door for China for the rest of the world, because they're already prepared, right? They are already leading the market in solar, in battery, in EVs. So by him saying, oh, we're not going to trade with you, they've gone, all right, fine, we'll just trade with everybody else. So that little blip means that that they've got, I think they're going to probably take advantage of that. Well, he's drilling for more oil. Who knows?
Yes, or his clean coal, as he describes it. Yes. Be very interested if you're listening to this or watching this podcast and you are stateside rather than UK, obviously.
Yes.
Very much UK. Do comment and let us know what you think about Emma's comments about the whole.
I'm only talking from my perspective, which is a tiny tiny window on the world, but
it'll be very interesting to hear your view. And yes, half of the audience, Emma, just for your information, is US based.
Fantastic.
So it'll be very interesting to see what you guys think of our comments and our thoughts here. Not necessarily views, but thoughts here today. So Emma, one final question, because I know you're super busy, but one final question. Who would you love to get on your podcast that you haven't had yet?
Well, I've written a list of about 50 people. And I'll be really honest, I'm leaning more towards female guests. And there's a reason for that, because throughout my career, the sustainability movement, particularly the area I came from, which was waste and recycling, is very male dominated. Less so in sustainability. So there's actually more women working in sustainability management positions than men. So it's quite unusual for that. But, you know, all the panels I've been on over the years, all the podcasts when I go and look at others, most of them were by men with male guests, right? So I've done a little bit of a thing there. Obviously, I'll still have male guests, but I'm trying to sort of do that little rebalance. And there's a couple of people on my list that I'm not even brave enough to ask because I don't know them. So I would like Christiana Figueres, who has a fantastic podcast of her own called Outrage and Optimism, and one that I look up to. So Christiana was involved in the Paris Agreement. So she talks brilliantly about COP. So anybody listening wants to know more about the COP process and the other COPs, because there's a biodiversity COP and a desertification COP. And so she's given me a real insight into those hugely complex kind of structures. She also has a great throwaway line, which I've kind of latched onto, which is about being stubbornly optimistic. So yeah, she's kind of my David Attenborough, really, Neil.
That's great. It's so good to hear. And again, now you've said it, you know, of course she listens to this show, so that'll be great. So now she'll be in touch.
I've put it out there in the universe, haven't I?
You've now put it out there, haven't you? So it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time, and we can all track and see that, yes, it started here when you put it out.
I'd know I'd made it if I could get her on. You never know. Maybe I'll have to do 500 odd episodes, Neil, to get to that point. But
you might accelerate. That juggernaut I think that you're on is it's moving a lot faster than mine. Mine's a little sedentary compared to yours, I think.
Oh, definitely not.
It's all good. It's all good. So everybody, if you haven't yet subscribed to the Straight Talking Sustainability podcast with Emma Burlow, you really must. We will put the link into the description below. Let us know what you think as well. Obviously, subscribe if you aren't already to the Neil Wilkins podcast, but let us know what you think of Emma's pretty new podcast over there on all of your favorite channels. So you're on Apple Podcasts, you're on Spotify and everywhere else.
Yeah, everywhere. Yeah. Come and find me. And, you know, I'm really keen to have guests from all across the world. So one of the things I like to do is to, you know, throw open the doors and windows and hear from other people. So if people feel like they've got something to contribute and they'd like to come on as a guest, then, you know, get in touch through you, Neil, or just find me on LinkedIn. It'd be great to chat.
Wonderful. And it is always great to chat. And I absolutely love our conversations. It's just so easy. You're just the easiest guest.
Oh,
you know, an absolute natural podcast host, I am sure as well. So,
still learning. Still got the same.
Always a pleasure. Hey, that never stops. Honestly, this is the whole point of what we do. I think is every episode is a learning episode. So it's all good. Thank you so much again, and wish you every success with your next and upcoming episodes.
Thanks, Neil.